Toby Coleman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Duke Journal of Constitutional Law and Public Policy. We're the journal that's helped organize this symposium. And I want to welcome you all here this morning and thank all of our participants for coming in from around the country. We're really excited to be presenting this symposium on redistricting. Part of the journal's mission is to look at timely topics of both constitutional law and public policy. And I don't think there's probably anything that's more timely right now than redistricting. Starting next year, all 50 states are going to start debating how to draw the lines all over again. And it's going to mean struggles about political power, about representation, and about all sorts of other things. This symposium is organized around some of the major topics involving redistricting. Even though we are primarily a law journal, we wanted to take a multidisciplinary look. So we've brought in law professors, we've brought in political scientists, we've brought in computer scientists to talk about some of the issues. We've also brought in a documentary filmmaker who, and we're going to see a little bit of his work. He's got a movie coming out called Gerrymandering. And we've brought in state officials who can talk a little bit about their practical experience. The first panel is on a topic that has been sort of a subject of debate, I think, for at least 200 years. Can we have an apolitical redistricting process? Now I'm going to turn it over to the moderator.
Thank you. I'm Michael Crowell. I work at a university down the road that, having accomplished everything they thought was necessary, has decided to give up college basketball. The topic is there a way to design an apolitical redistricting process? Can you take politics out of redistricting? And I assume our panelists will also talk about, should you take politics out of redistricting? What we have is we have three panelists who are going to make presentations and then two folks who are going to respond to their presentations. And then there'll be plenty of time for you folks to discuss and ask questions as well. We're going to start with Jeff Reichert in his documentary, Gerrymandering. He's working on the documentary. It's a work in progress. He's going to share it with us. This is his, he's the writer and director of this project. It's his current project. He previously was involved with the release campaigns for several documentaries that you've probably heard about, including Jesus Camp, which I saw, The Man on Wire, and Enron, the smartest guys in the room. What we're going to do is Jeff is going to show part of his documentary, and I'll wait until that to introduce the next two panelists, and then they'll make presentations about 15 to 20 minutes each, and then we'll have folks to respond to them. So Jeff, it is up to you.
Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. I know it's early for redistricting. So we're going to see about 15 minutes of the movie. It's cut together from a bunch of different places. It's going to start at the beginning of the movie and jump around to a few different sequences and end on a sequence that is, a bit on topic in terms of whether or not you can do apolitical redistricting, what other countries do in relationship to redistricting and electoral practices. So if you like it, it's a little rough. We're not finished with the movie yet. We haven't licensed the archival footage. You're going to see annoying little bands of numbers running under pieces of things with Ronald Reagan and Obama and things like that. Music's not finished, color correction, things like that. But I hope it'll play. And it's like I said, it is cobbled together from a bunch of different places, so it'll jump around a little bit.
Gerrymandering! You are welcome here! Come on! I'm afraid, sir, everybody here wears their hat and the coat. Bring on the British, we're ready! There you are, Callum. I wondered where you had gone.
Well, up comes Governor Gary, a federalist so fine. My heart be still takes out a quill and redraws all the lines. Redefines the boundary lines, look how it doth meander. Round Gloucester, Danvers, Beverly, just like a salamander. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. All the lassies in the world as sweet as sugar candy. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. All the lassies in the world as sweet as sugar candy. She got 2 bits. Nice.
In 1984, there were 367 congressional races contested by both parties. In the races, Republicans won 500,000 more votes than the Democrats. But the Democratic Party won 31 more seats.
As a consequence of the gerrymandering of congressional districts, people aren't being illogical when they stay at home because the outcome is a foregone conclusion.
Lines never happen by accident. Every line is carefully conceived.
I do think it's very difficult for us to try to draw these lines. There isn't any doubt that they're unsatisfactorily drawn, not only for the Congress, which is not the worst offender, but the state legislature, where we have had for many years notorious examples of gerrymandering.
Think of all the millions of men and women across America in their 20s and 30s who has never known true two-party competition in the House. This form of voter discrimination must end.
Enforce the Voting Rights Act so as to make possible equity and parity for those who have been locked out. That's why we will keep challenging these oppressive schemes like gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering is maybe the greatest election scam ever perpetrated on the American people.
Overall, the last study that I saw showed that the Republicans would gain more from reapportionment than they would lose.
It is the most effective way of manipulating elections short of outright fraud. Why stuff ballots when you can draw districts?
One of the unfortunate realities of American political life is that in the voting booth, some Americans are less equal than others. There are a number of factors that cause this inequality in voting and representation. Some of them are disgraceful, some are merely old-fashioned, and some of them are rather bizarre. To demonstrate one of the bizarre factors, we have taken the New York ferry boat over here to Staten Island, which is the 16th congressional district in the state of New York. Now, not all of the 16th district is here on Staten Island. Some of it lies several miles across the water on that murky and exotic shore you see across there, which is Brooklyn. We cannot see the other part of the district from here because it is separated from us not only by several miles of water, but by 2 other congressional districts in between. Our topic technically is congressional redistricting and legislative reapportionment. But in reality, we'll be talking about the political combat that shapes these curious boundaries and determines the power of our individual vote.
Gerrymandering is the manipulation of district lines for political gain. Political power in Congress is based around population. Bigger states like California and Texas are rewarded with more seats than smaller states like Rhode Island and Delaware. Since our population is constantly changing, people move, have babies, die, the Constitution requires that a census be held every 10 years to count the people of each state. Census numbers are used in the process of reapportionment to determine how many of the 435 congressional seats each state gets. As states grow in population, they get more seats, and they take those seats from states that have grown less quickly. After each reapportionment, every state must alter the boundaries of their congressional districts to account for these changes. This is called redistricting. The United States is the only advanced democracy in the world where politicians directly participate in the districting process. Why does this matter? You live in a district. Many districts, actually. Congressional, state senate, assembly, city council, school. Everyone in America lives in districts. all districts are bounded by lines. The way district lines are drawn can determine who represents you for decades at a time.
There is an image held the world over of an American democracy that is robust, vibrant, open to change, and subject to the will of the voter. This image is an unfortunate illusion. Gerrymandering is America's best kept secret.
This area is the San Gabriel Valley of Los Angeles. The motivation for how this whole area ended up getting gerrymandered was that there was a senator who lived in this area. And she was particularly afraid of an up-and-coming assembly person who might challenge her for her seat, who represented the Asian American community that sits on top of this area. And so what she had to make sure of was that this community, the Asian American community, was divided into 4 different pieces. And so this area and this area. I am Kathy Fung. I am the Executive Director of California Common Cause. In 2001, I had a particularly pleasant experience with an assembly member who, during the redistricting process, she called me up. This is in San Francisco. And she called me up to say, Kathy, you're not going to put another effing Asian in my district. And in San Francisco, by the way, 1 in 3 people are Asian, of some type of Asian Pacific Islander descent. So you can't move a block without putting another effing Asian in her district. And it was that type of arrogance and frankly racism that drove me to ask the question, does it make sense for incumbents to be drawing these lines? The city of Long Beach is cut into 3 different pieces, and this area, which happens to have a fairly large African American community, is also cut into 3 pieces, all because an incumbent at the lower house was thinking about running for the Senate seat and had her house drawn in.
How many seats are actually competed for in representative elections? How many of our state legislatures have never had an opponent or haven't had an opponent in a decade? How many win 70-30? How likely is it that anybody will contribute money to a campaign of anyone running against an incumbent in a 70% district? Those kinds of issues which just get across the sense of you're going to the polls, but you have no choice.
The myth of democracy is that, it's a myth. In the redistricting process, it's really a war, and you have a lot of weapons in your arsenal.
You can talk about racial gerrymandering, where gerrymandering might favor whites. You can talk about partisan gerrymandering, where the lines are drawn to favor a particular political party, the Democrats or the Republicans. Or you can talk about incumbency gerrymandering. And in an incumbency gerrymander, the lines are drawn to favor the incumbents. Sweetheart deals, as we sometimes call them.
They ostensibly are trying to achieve the same number of people in each district, but they draw these very weird shaped districts in order to get the right people.
I think gerrymandering really works at its worst when individual legislators decide to draw their competition directly out of their district. They target individuals and they literally box them out so that they can't possibly beat you in the next election.
You know, I used to live on this block.
Oh, really?
In 2002, but the lines were redrawn, most people believe, to get me out of the 57th Assembly District.
I mean, I'm laughing,
Yeah.
but no, because, you know, they've been doing this for a year.
Right.
I mean, it's been a tradition.
No, that's what happened.
This
Absolutely,
now
this is a different district, yeah.
Just right here.
Just right here. Well, if you walk back down
I was elected to the New York State Assembly in November of 2006. Prior to that, I had challenged the incumbent of 20 plus years in both 2000 and 2002. The incumbent, Roger Green, was a long-time insider in the Brooklyn Democratic machine, and I decided that it was time for the community to move forward under different leadership. I had no prior political experience, no name recognition, no money in the bank. Probably only 2 people in the district whose support I could count on, myself and my wife's. But at the end of the day, we had secured over 40% of the vote and shocked the Brooklyn Democratic political machine.
Those collection of 5 communities really are put together to get to the 125,000 people within the 57th Assembly District that I represent. There are 150.
Hakeem figured he would run again in 2002. What he forgot was that intervening was redistricting. And the map that was drawn was absolutely fascinating. They drew a map that literally carved out the block on which Hakeem Jeffries lived from Assembly District 57.
I remember shaking my head in disbelief. There were a lot of people hoping to vote for me, but were surprised to find that they no longer lived in the Assembly District that they had been living in for years, if not decades. Brooklyn politics can be pretty rough, but that move was gangster.
Some people think that representing these districts is a birthright, but you know, this is a democracy. It's not a dictatorship. It's not a monarchy. And
I believe that when I work for the people, they give you a 2-year contract, and every year that contract is subject to renewal. They can decide to fire you, or they can decide to rehire you. And one of the big problems with the way in which political lines are redrawn is that you really take away from the public that evaluation process by preventing competitive elections.
Gerrymandering, a 5-syllable word meaning to design a district to help one party win it. Willie Brown recalls a gerrymandered district that was once proposed to help him win. At this point, the district was so narrow that it included only 1 lane and the center stripe of a San Francisco street.
Picasso would have been proud of the manner in which the lines had been drawn and the thing had been sculptured.
We thought that King George didn't have it right, and so there was a big fight about how to share that power throughout the pyramid. And we did it structurally to an extent, but we didn't do it perfectly. I think that democracy is messy, but that we've committed ourselves to it, and that the process itself builds legitimacy.
How does it work in India? How do you elect members of parliament?
It's an election thing. Like we have 2 houses over there. One is like public, people elect those people, and the other house is just voted amongst the top leaders.
What are your names?
Corina. And Alexandra.
Where are you from?
Austria. And Germany.
How does it work in Austria?
I vote a party, and the party who is the winner, they send representatives to the parliament in Austria.
What did you say again? Gerrymandering?
Oh, gerrymandering is like the circumscription district when you cut it like to vote. Mm-hmm. Okay, gerrymandering. Yeah, we actually had some classes about it, but it's far away. So.
Is it something that happens in France?
Oh, no, not at all.
You know, you can take politics out of redistricting. Politicians have their own reasons for not listening to this message, but in most Western democracies, redistricting is not political. We modeled our system after the British system, but the British have reformed their system, and the Canadians have reformed their system, and the Australians have reformed their system, and here's the United States still doing it by the same dirty, nasty way they've always done it.
The international norm is proportional representation. The international norm is a parliamentary system rather than a presidential system. They have a right to vote in their constitutions. Almost every country has a right to vote established in the constitution. We do not. And in fact, they've typically junked our model almost entirely.
In a proportional representation system, it's more inclusive, but the parties choose candidates and they don't use single-member districts. In the U.S. system, we want to choose who the person is that is going to represent us.
What would it take to bring democracy to the United States when we think of democracy, the way in which it's practiced more successfully in other countries, and by more successfully, meaning more people actually participate, more people vote, more people express satisfaction with their democracy? If we define it in that sense, it will take a revolution of the mind.
What's that? Did we sit up here now? We sit here now?
Did you want
No, that's
say anything else about?
No, that's it. We can talk about it.
Well, for just a second, tell us what your plans are for the documentary. When you think you can be done? And
yeah, we'll be done before the midterm elections, and we hope to have it in theaters by then, so that way people
especially with advocacy groups, going to be using it to educate people about redistricting, so folks are thinking about the implications of who they're going to put in the legislatures this November, and then it will be available on DVD by the time each state goes to start drawing their lines.
Let's have our panelists come up now, and I'll introduce you, then you can get started. In addition to Jeff, we have 4 panelists neatly divided into our Ohio contingent and our Carolinas contingent. The Ohio folks are going to go first, and they're going to make presentations of papers they've been working on. First is Justin Buchler, who's with political science at Case Western Reserve University, where he studies redistricting and the effects of competitive elections on political institutions. 2 doors down from Jeff is Stephen Hefner. Have I pronounced that correctly? Huffner, close enough. Stephen Huffner is a senior fellow at the Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law, where he's the director of clinical programs and director of Moritz Legislation Clinic. He previously worked with the U.S. Senate's Office of Legal Counsel, advising on contested Senate elections and the 1999 presidential impeachment trial. Following their presentations, we will have responses by our 2 Carolinas folks. First is Bobby Bowers, who is at the far end, and when he starts speaking, you'll figure out right away that he's the one from South Carolina.
I hope you understand me.
I first ran into Bobby, 15, 20 years ago, roaming eastern North Carolina, gerrymandering folks. He's been working with redistricting for the South Carolina legislature for a number of years. Also serves as a technical advisor in various federal courts in South Carolina, Texas, New Hampshire. He's testified as an expert witness, so he has a lot of hands-on experience with redistricting. And finally, on this end is Bob Phillips, who's the executive director of Common Cause in North Carolina and has been in the forefront of efforts in the North Carolina General Assembly in recent years to make various kinds of election reforms, public financing of campaigns, ethics legislation, and so forth. So let's start with Justin, and then we'll go to Stephen, and then we'll have the responses from the other 2.
Okay, and I'm going to need this. I'll figure out how to use this as we go, I guess. I don't need this up quite yet, but we'll talk about this later. So, is there a way to design an apolitical redistricting process? My basic answer is no, not at all. It is not possible. So, I'm sort of puzzled by the word political. So, I'm a political scientist. I love politics. I think politics are great. But the word political is sort of an epithet. And it's curious how that happened, but what tends to happen in political dialogue is anytime somebody doesn't like an outcome, somebody doesn't like something that happened, oh, this is political. Well, of course it's political. This is politics. Everything is political. So when we talk about the redistricting process and the possibility of apolitical redistricting, whatever that means, there are generally 2 types of approaches we can use in order to try to get something that you might call apolitical. So you can talk about the redistricting. Can you stand at the podium, please? Oh, sure. Sorry, I'm not used to podiums. So when we talk about the redistricting process, we can talk about it being political in one of 2 contexts. We can talk about it as political in terms of the delegation decision, who gets authority for redistricting, or we can talk about the process as being political in terms of the specific geographic algorithm that is used to draw district lines. And the basic argument I'm going to make is that every single algorithm you might use is political because it selects winners and losers. Every redistricting plan creates a set of winners and losers because we have a winner-take-all electoral system in this country. Every redistricting plan will create a set of winners and losers. Therefore, the choice of any redistricting algorithm is a choice between sets of winners and sets of losers. Furthermore, The delegation decision will affect what type of plan you use. Therefore, the delegation decision is itself a choice between winners and losers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about who wins and who loses under different redistricting algorithms. So I'm going to talk specifically about 3 different types of redistricting plans. I'm going to call all of them gerrymanders, and I'm going to use the historically accurate pronunciation of gerrymander. Elbridge Gerry should be pronounced gerrymander. Anyway, so we're going to talk about 3 different types of gerrymanders. First is the partisan gerrymander. So nobody likes the partisan gerrymander. We all know what that is. That's the old pack and crack strategy where you take the party that you don't like and you pack their voters really inefficiently such that they have 80, 90% of the vote in one set of districts, and you give yourself thin majorities of maybe 55, 60% in a lot of districts so that you spread your voters out as efficiently as possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bipartisan gerrymander. That's basically where you pack every district, so you have a lot of districts that are very heavily Democratic and a lot of districts that are very heavily Republican and nothing in the middle. And then I'm going to talk about the competitive gerrymander. Now, most people don't use the word gerrymander in terms of competitive redistricting plan. So in a competitive redistricting plan, basically what you're doing is you're creating lots of districts with equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans so that you get competitive elections. People talk about that plan as though it's not a gerrymander. Well, it is a gerrymander. Why? Because it creates winners and losers. And every plan that creates winners and losers does that. Every redistricting plan creates winners and losers. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about who wins and who loses under each redistricting algorithm. And every plan has winners and losers. Let's just talk about which ones we want to be the winners and losers. So under the partisan gerrymander, it's pretty obvious who the winners and losers are. The winners under a partisan gerrymander are the people who draw district lines such that they get more seats than they otherwise should. So nobody really likes a partisan gerrymander because it gives one party more seats than it proportionally would have under a redistricting plan that we might consider fair. That's pretty obvious. The bipartisan gerrymander is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So when we talk about a bipartisan gerrymander, what most people think of as the winners and losers, people will generally say that the winners in a bipartisan gerrymander are extremists, because that's the redistricting plan that's supposed to create ideological extremism in the legislature. It's going to turn out to be a little bit more complicated than that. So if you think about who the real winners and losers are under a bipartisan gerrymander, the real winners are the people who are in districts where they get to elect the people that they actually want to elect. So if you have a district that is 75% Democratic, 25% Republican, what happens is the Democrat's going to win. 25% of the population there are losers. Now compare that to a 50-50 district. A Democrat or a Republican is still going to win, which means you're going to have about 49% of the district as losers. That's more losers under the competitive plan. That's interesting. But let's talk a little bit about this ideological extremism, polarization. So there's a conventional wisdom when we talk about redistricting that we have polarization in Congress, and that this is the result of lots of bipartisan gerrymanders where we draw incumbent protection plans. Every district is either very heavily Democratic or very heavily Republican, no competitive elections. As a result, everybody sort of moves to the extremes to win primaries, and nobody moves to the middle because you don't have to worry about a general election, right? So this is the conventional wisdom on partisan gerrymanders. So the first graph up here, this is ideology scores from the 83rd Congress, House of Representatives. So this was elected in 1952. Now, it's not a perfect normal distribution, but we've got a lot of centrists there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll through, and we're going to go up to modern day and see how Congress has changed. So, all right, so 85th, so this was 1956. Got a little bit of a dip in the middle there, but not hugely polarized. 87th, 89th, starting to get a little bit of polarization here. 91st, 93rd, 95th, 97th, 99th. Now we're starting to get some real polarization here. 101st, 103rd. All right, so now we're at 1992. This was the 1992 election. We're starting to see some real polarization here. 105th, 107th, and 109th. I love this one. So this is what Congress looked like after the 2004 election. So when we talk about polarization and why you get polarization in Congress, the conventional wisdom is this is redistricting. What we've done is we've gotten rid of all the competitive districts. As a result of getting rid of all the competitive districts, nobody moves to the center to win a general election because nobody has to worry about a general election. They move to the extremes to win primaries. So this is sort of the conventional story that's accepted by journalists and pundits. So let's talk about whether or not polarization can actually explain this graph. So the story then is redistricting systems using bipartisan gerrymanders have gotten rid of competitive districts. So let's do something relatively simple and look at how many competitive districts there are in each election. Sounds kind of simple, right? Well, let's do that. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. There are no more competitive districts. There's a pretty obvious lesson from this graph. The proportion of districts in this country which are actually competitive has not gone down. You cannot explain the progression we just looked at, where we went from 1952 to 2004 and moved from relatively centrist Congress to polarized Congress. You can't explain that with this graph because competitive districts didn't go anywhere. And in fact, if you look at those numbers a little bit more carefully, you'll notice that in 2004, we actually had more competitive districts than in 1952. There were more districts where the presidential candidates were separated by 10 points or less in 2004 than in 1952. Competitive districts didn't go anywhere. Therefore, we cannot explain polarization with the disappearance of competitive districts. Just can't be done. And in fact, if you look at the numbers a little bit more carefully, so we've got about a quarter of the districts in 2004 where Bush and Kerry were separated by less than 10 points. So that means that theoretically we should have about a quarter of the districts where you've got a lot of centrist pressure. Well, let's go back. Where are the centrists? Those districts where the presidential candidates are separated by less than 10 points, those marginal districts where you're supposed to get competitive elections, even they're not electing centrists anymore. So something interesting is happening here. We still have competitive districts, but the centrists are not the winners under competitive redistricting plans because ideological extremists are winning anyway. So one more piece on this to demonstrate really that you cannot explain polarization with the disappearance of competitive districts. Let's look at what happens in the Senate. So we don't redraw state lines. Every once in a while a river moves and you have to argue about that. But for the most part, we don't redraw state lines. Therefore, if we see the same trend in the Senate, it can't be redistricting that's causing polarization. So let's look at the Senate. So 83rd Senate, 85th, 87th, 89th. Is this looking familiar? 93rd, so, all right, 95th, 97th, starting to get that dip in the middle again, 99th, 101st, 103rd, 105th. Is this looking familiar? The same thing is happening in the Senate that's happening in the House. You cannot explain polarization in Congress with the disappearance of competitive districts because of gerrymandering in the House if, one, competitive districts didn't go anywhere, and two, we see the same trend in the Senate. So there's this conventional wisdom that if you have a bipartisan gerrymander, what you're going to do is you're going to make losers out of the centrists and winners out of the ideological extremists because bipartisan gerrymanders cause polarization. And that's just not the case. The winners and the losers under a bipartisan gerrymander are as follows. The winners are the people who get to elect the people of their own choice, which is most of the districts. The losers are the people who are sort of stuck in the wrong district. So if you have a plan where you stick 70% of every district with a majority party and 30% the minority party, then the losers under that system are the 30% who are stuck in the wrong district, as opposed to a competitive gerrymander where you draw lots of 50-50 districts and the losers are roughly half the population. So the idea that we're creating losers out of the centrists with bipartisan gerrymanders is just not right. So now let's talk about the competitive gerrymander and what that really does. So first of all, hypothetically, let's say it were the case that if you wanted to make winners out of the centrists and losers out of the extremists, you could do that with a competitive gerrymander. Hypothetically, if that were the case, would that really be such a good thing? Well, it sort of depends on how centrist the population is, right? Well, you don't even need the population to be as polarized as the House and the Senate are in order to be uncomfortable with the idea of making winners out of the centrists and losers out of the extremists. So a couple of normal distributions here. I like throwing up statistical distributions. So there are two distributions here. One is a very centrist distribution. The other is a much less centrist distribution. So these are both normal distributions. One has a standard deviation of 0.4. The other has a standard deviation of 2. So hypothetically, let's say we could draw a lot of competitive districts, and as a result, every district elects a centrist. Well, if we're looking at the distribution where the standard deviation is 0.4, that's pretty good because the population is pretty centrist. So that's a lot of winners and very few losers, right? Well, the problem is, what if the population looks like the other distribution with a standard deviation of 2? Well, if you have a lot of competitive districts, and that means centrists win all the elections, that leaves a lot of people without any representation. That's not necessarily a good thing. That's making losers out of a lot of people. And in fact, when we consider what happens if competitive gerrymanders do not elect centrists, and we've talked about the possibility that competitive gerrymanders do not, well, then what happens is you get a population that looks maybe like that really flat distribution with a standard deviation of 2, and extremists elected anyway, which we've seen happen. So if that happens, then it's not just 50% of the people who are losers, it's most of the population are losers, because you've got a lot of people represented by representatives who are very far from their ideological positions. So when we think about who the winners and who the losers are under any given redistricting system, it's simply not the case that there's a redistricting plan out there that creates no winners and losers. There are winners and losers. Now, the difference between the competitive gerrymander and the bipartisan gerrymander is in terms of how the losers and winners are created. So in a bipartisan gerrymander, you create the winners and the losers through the redistricting system. The redistricting system will determine a priori who the winners and the losers are. With a competitive gerrymander, you don't determine who the winners and the losers are through drawing district lines. You determine who the winners and the losers are through the election after the district lines are drawn, but you're still going to wind up with winners and losers. Now, the question then between wanting a bipartisan versus a competitive gerrymander is, which are you more comfortable with? Are you more comfortable with a plan that creates a lot of losers but doesn't determine in advance who those losers are? Or are you more comfortable with a plan that has fewer losers but determines in advance who those losers are? That's an open question. However, every redistricting plan, every algorithm you can use creates winners and losers. Now, we can delegate authority for redistricting to people who don't necessarily have a stake in the process. And the motivation for doing that usually is sometimes implicit, sometimes an explicit desire to have competitive gerrymanders. However, if that's the case, then the delegation decision is indistinguishable from the algorithm decision. So if every algorithm creates a set of winners and losers, then the choice of algorithms creates a set of winners and losers. If the choice of algorithms creates a set of winners and losers, then the choice of delegation also creates a set of winners and losers. Every redistricting plan will create winners and losers. That is an inherently political decision. There is no such thing as an apolitical redistricting system. So.
Well, that answers our question as to whether you can create an apolitical districting system, but we may have some additional comments. So we're going to hold our questions for Justin and let Stephen go ahead and make his presentation. Is anybody else hearing a thumping sound up there? Do we know how to deal with that? Stephen, do you want to sit there, stay there?
I'd prefer to sit here if this mic is working. Can I get a signal? Is that good? All right. I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank the Journal of Constitutional Law and Public Policy for the invitation to be here. At the outset, I think I want to directly discuss a definitional problem. I teach legislation where one of the things that we have fun doing with the students is talking about literal interpretation versus contextual and understanding spirit of words from time to time. And I think the term political redistricting, as Justin said, is commonly used as a bit of an epithet, but it is in that spirit that I took the topic of the panel today. Is there a way to design an apolitical redistricting process? Suggests to my mind two what I think of as sort of common understandings of the term political. One would be a process in which the district lines are drawn without information about party. That is a politically blind process, at least in a common usage of the term political. And another, what I think of as common meaning of the term, is with independent judgment about the lines. That is to say, the lines not being drawn deliberately to favor a particular party. Now, I recognize both of those definitions or redefinitions of what I take the panel topic to be about may be contestable, and they both, in turn, depend upon really understanding the term political to involve a partisanship component. And Justin's absolutely correct that there is a broader way of defining political. And as a political scientist, I understand where he's coming from on that point. And in fact, I share some of that same desire that the term political not be an epithet in our common discourse. But nonetheless, what I want to talk about today are the prospects of a politically independent type of redistricting in that common sense of the term. I want to focus primarily about the prospects of that type of redistricting process more than its desirability, although there's plenty to be said on that topic as well. And before I move just to the prospects or the possibilities question, I would just offer one of my own reactions to the way in which Justin's characterized the fact that any districting process is going to create winners and losers, which is to invite us and Justin to be thinking about whether that's focusing too narrowly on simply the question of individual citizens and their, well, I think what I'm hearing Justin saying is that you can accumulate that sort of individualized winners and losers status. But it seems to me that, first of all, it's not clear that the losers, as Justin's defined them, are not represented. They're still represented. It's not an all or nothing circumstance. And more importantly to me than that is to think about whether we need to focus not just on those individualized outcomes voter by voter, but the impact on the process. And that there are substantial values in the nature of the debate that occurs and the nature of the continuing representation that occurs even with respect to people that Justin's identified as losers, depending on the way in which they are grouped and aggregated. But for now, I want to shift to talk about just the prospects of getting away from a intensely partisanship, or, intensely partisan districting process to something less so. There's some interesting things happening in Ohio that I just wanted to mention. In Ohio, the legislature draws the congressional districts, but a state apportionment board draws the districts for the state legislature. And the state apportionment board is a partisan board consisting of the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state, all statewide elected officers, and then 2 people appointed by the legislative leadership in the Ohio legislature, 1 from each party. The composition of that board, therefore, depends on the partisanship of those 3 statewide elected office holders. Next fall, we will be re-electing those 3 statewide office holders. At this point, it is unclear who will have control over the apportionment board. At this point, it's also unclear who will have control of our state legislature. At the moment, we have a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. The Republican Senate is almost sure to stay Republican. The Democratic House is more vulnerable. We also have a Democratic governor. What that means for the drawing of maps after the 2010 census is that both parties are somewhat at risk for both our General Assembly map and our congressional map. And in that context, there may be more possibility for the politicians themselves, if they're sufficiently risk averse, to think about some adjustment to the way in which those lines are drawn. And therefore, at the moment, there is a serious proposal that Republicans in the Senate are behind to put before the voters in November, a proposal to reconstitute the apportionment board and then require it to approve a map that would focus on preserving existing political subdivisions by a supermajority that would require bipartisanship in the board. Meanwhile, there's a proposal coming out of the Democrats in the House that would create a public competition, inviting any member of the public to submit a map, and that would then be scored based on some specified criteria or an algorithm, as Justin described it. What are the prospects that either of those will actually be on the ballot next fall? I would say small, but not impossible. There's a history here that I want to turn to. Ohio, in the last several decades, has, on several different occasions, had measures for the public, inviting the public through our state initiative process to reconsider or reconfigure the way in which we conduct our districting. The most recent of those efforts was an attempt in 2005 to create a process in which competitiveness would be the principal factor that would govern the maps that were created. That proposal lost badly. It only attracted 30% of the vote. At the same time, California had a similar type of proposal on its ballot in 2005, which also lost, not as badly. And since then, in both states, there have been some additional efforts. And most significantly, in 2008, California succeeded in enacting a dramatic revision to the way in which they conduct their district, or conduct their map-making process. And they're now forming a Citizens Redistricting Commission that will ultimately consist of 14 members selected through this sequential process, the first step of which was to accept applications from any California voter who'd voted in the last 2 of the last 3 statewide elections, and they had 30,000 citizens apply for that redistricting commission. Ohio has been working on some other things before the measures I described a minute ago that are now being discussed in our state legislature. But nothing's happened the way it has in California. Now, of course, no matter how you're doing redistricting, you're going to need to have some set of criteria to follow, whether it's nothing more than the federally mandated equal population and compliance with the Voting Rights Act and drawing of contiguous districts or not. And the other things that you might do would be to require districts to be drawn in a politically blind fashion, that is to say without regard to the partisan composition in the way I've defined political. And there are some obvious reasons to be attracted to that. It's also problematic if what you are interested in doing is trying to prevent what you would perhaps be inclined to call a politically unfair map. There are natural ways in which populations aggregate, especially in urban areas, and if you preclude consideration of those demographic trends, you end up just, in many states anyway, naturally seeing a pack and crack outcome. And you can only prevent that, at least in some states where the Democratic voters are concentrated in urban areas, by paying attention to those demographic trends. You might, therefore, instead think about, as a redistricting criteria, a concept of representational fairness, or partisan fairness. That's not to say proportionality. It's not to say that in a state that's 60% Republican and 40% Democrat, that you should have 60% districts that Republicans consistently win and 40% Democrats. It's instead that shifts in the electorate's view in a particular election can't in advance be predicted to favor one party or the other. That there's a symmetry in the way in which the districts are drawn. So that if a 1% increase in vote share on behalf of one party would be likely to produce a 5% increase in the number of districts that that party controls, a symmetrical system would be one in which a 1% shift in the opposite direction for the other party would produce a 5% shift in the number of districts for them. And there are a variety of ways that we could try to actually measure that type of partisan fairness. Another possible criterion is competitiveness, as Justin's described. Compactness, which I've made some reference to, the idea that we want voters to not be scattered to the four winds or to be across the Hudson River and on the other side of several other districts, as the example in the documentary suggested. A related possibility is to try and protect these already existent political subdivisions. Now, I'm just mentioning these really primarily to make clear that specifying a particular set of criteria that someone deems important is not an easy thing. And even if you've decided that competitiveness does matter, for instance, how to measure competitiveness is not an easy thing to sort out. Those are themselves political questions in the broader sense that Justin's been talking about, something that's political. But solving or answering those questions need not itself be a partisan issue or need not be political in a pejorative sense. And it's also the case that once you have a set of criteria in place, the resulting redistricting process then itself no longer needs to be politicized in the sense that the way in which those criteria are being applied where there's discretion is being manipulated to partisan ends. Now, with that said, let me talk about the institutions a little bit. An institution is always going to be criticized, or always going to be vulnerable to being criticized as manipulating the way in which lines are drawn, no matter what algorithm they've used. If the institute, and that's partly because there will be winners and losers, someone's going to be upset, and then the institution's going to come under attack if it is itself perceived as being partisan. So we have around the country different models out there. There are independent boards, the Arizona Redistricting Commission being a good example. The proposal that the Republicans and the Ohio Senator are behind right now is an interesting one in the sense that it's still using partisans on this board, but it's with a supermajority requirement, which if it worked would be quite different. If we really had, now it still could give rise to the sweetheart gerrymander, but not the partisan gerrymander. And in fact, that proposal in Ohio is consistent with some calls that others in the academy have made to try and in some way improve the redistricting process by injecting more politics into the process, as opposed to trying to completely isolate this from political concerns. But, you know, I want to support a different approach. What I want to talk about is another way of injecting more politics into the process, in a sense, by doing more to bring the voters, the citizens at large, into the process. Much greater citizen participation, somewhat in the ways in which California's Citizen Redistricting Commission is moving forward. The American public, in my view, is of two minds in this particular area. We want the individuals who are involved in our institutions of government, including those in the redistricting process, to be accountable. What does that mean? Well, in a sense, it means we want them to be political. The primary way in which we have tended to want to hold people accountable is to feel like we want to be able to elect them or not re-elect them. At the same time, there is this sense among people who think about it that we want our redistrictors not to be manipulating that process for partisan ends. Now, it's difficult to get both of those when what you do is leave the legislature in charge of the drawing of the district. So I'd like us to look for a different type of accountability than the way in which it's typically been thought of, a participatory accountability along the lines of citizen assemblies, citizen juries, that type of thing. And in that connection, I want to just mention something else going on in Ohio. Last spring, the League of Women Voters of Ohio sponsored a public competition that was designed to bring the public much more centrally into the discussion about the redistricting process. And Professor Mark Altman, who will be here on our afternoon panel, was the person most responsible for conducting the computer mapping aspects of that process, and he'll talk about that more. But it was an example, in a sense, of infusing more politics into the process in a way that Heather Gerken has talked about previously. This is a public and sort of popular kind of politics, not a partisan one. But that same type of process could also, or something that's trying to do the same thing, could be done also for things like the choice of the algorithm or the choice of the criteria, using some type of electoral reform jury. These are things being experimented. British Columbia has been working on or doing something that's related. Now, they're not working perfectly by any stretch of the imagination at this point. Chris Elmendorf and Ethan Lieb are thinking about ways in which some type of citizen assembly might work more effectively than what we've seen in British Columbia. There's some interesting ways to compare this with things like deliberative polling that Fishkin has been working on for some time. But I do think there's a real value in trying to bring the public much more into the process. And let me wrap up by just talking about why that is, I think, particularly important. for people who believe that finding a different way to draw our districts is important, there are two primary obstacles to getting there. One is that redistricting is an issue of comparatively low salience among the public at large. People don't know very much about it. I don't know if that's what you're finding, Jeff, as you were doing your work putting the movie together, but I think that's pretty consistently been the conclusion of people who've actually, empirically studied the way in which the public thinks about this issue. There's a real role, therefore, to educate the public. But efforts just to educate them, I think, are difficult, notwithstanding the potential of something like the movie to try and increase the salience of this issue. On the other hand, involving the public, not as spectators, but as actors, I think is a dramatically different way of changing that low salience. The 30,000 people who've signed up or have expressed an interest in being on California's commission, I think is suggestive of that. And those people in turn are talking to their friends and their family. It's increasing public awareness to be asking the public to be more involved, no matter how many people actually do it. And again, that can be accomplished in a variety of different ways. The second obstacle is this public desire for accountability, or the fear of an unaccountable process. And of course, as I mentioned, we've typically seen demands for accountability satisfied through elections. But it's not the only way. And if the public wants a process to be accountable to itself, what better way to do that than to have the public be the ones doing it? Now, of course, that's too clever by half to say that. You can't actually have all the citizens of a state doing the redistricting. And therefore, Tom Brunel, who along with Justin Buchler have done some interesting thinking about the problem of trying to prioritize competitive districts, has this thought experiment where he says, well, what we want to do then is conduct an election among the public to try and get a representative group of people who can do our districting. Aha, well, we've done that. That's what our state legislature is. Leave it to the state legislature. The difference is we're not holding our state legislators accountable for that one issue, but it's the one issue that allows them to draw the line so that they can't be as effectively accountable for everything that they're doing. Now, it'd be a different matter if what we were doing was conducting an election to constitute a redistricting body, and that body might be in some ways analogous to a state legislature, but the only responsibility that we would give it would be to draw the district lines. And then that body would have no self-interest in how they draw the lines. And that might be a possibility, but I think there are easier ways to get there than to try to reconstitute an entire sort of additional representative assembly. And the citizen juries, the citizen assemblies, the redistricting competitions are ways to do that. There's one more thing happening in Ohio, and I know that Heather's going to be talking about this a little more in her remarks to us today. The Joyce Foundation is sponsoring an effort. I mean, they've got an accountable redistricting project underway. It's a multi-year project, and as part of that, in both Ohio and Illinois, there are serious efforts to try to draw in all the stakeholders who want to be included into a broadly participatory effort using mediation as a technique. We'll see where this goes. To think about what type of redistricting algorithm and delegation or criteria and process the public, when properly informed, would feel was an improvement and still gave them accountability.
Thank you. I have some questions, but I've seen Bobby over there shaking his head. Now, out of respect for you and your state, I'm not going to say anything about Argentina.
I hadn't come from Argentina to be here. And I have my soulmate with me.
We're now going to look for Bobby and then Bob shows you the difference between South and North Carolina. To comment on what they've heard or introduce additional thoughts.
I'm going to stand since I'm going to jump back in my car, and I've got a meeting in Columbia at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and that's 4 hours from here for me. My wife will not let me speed much. Let me start off by the process by saying, first, I'm the practitioner in this whole thing. From the first case I got involved in 1973, yes, I'm that old, and which I was delegated by the Attorney General and the Governor to be the technical person for both the plaintiffs and the defendants in this case, without perjuring myself. So I've survived one of those wars already. But let me also say that I have not decided yet whether I am a Democrat or a Republican. So I have to be nonpartisan where I'm at. Then let me also say that I have just shocked Justin when I told him up front after reading his paper that I agreed with him. He said I was the first one that's ever agreed with him on his paper. So I feel unique today, and I'm proud I agree with him, because having been in this process this long and watched it go through some 30 years of maneuvering, and it's a personal thing with our elected officials. I can promise you it is very personal when it gets to this time of year. I noticed already my legislative members are getting much, much more kinder to me now than they were earlier, because they know that even though I'm not going to draw the House and Senate districts this time, I'm going to be neutral like I was the last 2 decades, so that when it goes to federal court, and they know it will, I'll probably be sitting with the federal court drawing their plan for them. And they all want to be kind to me and hope that I remember where the heck they're at. In fact, if any of you who may get assigned to work with the federal court, don't let them make you the court's expert. Because if they do, then each lawyer in there can depose you and cross-examine you on the stand. First time I was in there, the judge researched it, and there were 32 lawyers in the case. And he made me the court's technical advisor, which means I am technically working for the court, sitting at the bench with them. And it was an admonition to our governor and legislature. They would not even ask me the time of day. And it's easier to please 3 federal judges than it is 170 legislators, I can promise you that. How personal is it? Well, we talk about winners and losers. And I agree with him, there are going to be winners and losers. No, you cannot take politics, and I like this in your thing, you can't take politics out of a political process. And redistricting is a very political process, all the way down to a small town of 400 that I had to cut into 4 districts, or all the way up to the Senate or the congressional districts, which have got about 700,000 people in them. It is a political process. Our legislature draws the House and Senate and Congress. They also draw the school districts that have single-member districts. The counties draw their own districts, and the cities draw their own districts. Even I get more grief from some of the small towns than I get from the legislators. In fact, my wife says if I don't get threatened once or twice a year, I think I haven't done a good job. And I do get threatened about once or twice a year with physical harm and death in one case. And I had police escort all over the place. You got to understand, some of these little guys in some of these small towns will kill you just for the pleasure of being called Your Honor. Literally. I was in one night where 2 members got in a fight across the table at county council. The legislature was drawing the districts, and the next morning, the senator came running out of the chamber. You ain't gonna believe what happened last night. I said, what? He said, when you left at 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock this morning, old Mr. So-and-so got so, because I couldn't please both of them. One plan here, one plan there. He said, old Mr. So-and-so got so excited he had a heart attack and died. I said, well, let's solve that problem. We'll go to the other plan. And he said, don't you think that's cruel? I said, in this business, when God helps you out, you thank him and move on. So it is a brutal process. I had a friend that said to me, doesn't it bother you that when these people lose, they blame you? I said, yeah, but when they lose, they don't count anymore. And the winners think I drew it just for them. So there are going to be winners and losers. But let me say that from what I have seen over the years, the only way you're going to get a nonpartisan, non-racial, non-incumbent plan is to take your database and give it to some state, some country like Mexico or Canada, with the only criteria is to draw compact, contiguous districts. So they don't know the incumbents, they don't know the racial background, and they don't know the political parties. Because I can promise you it is a hassle right now. We are one of the 6 original states covered by the 1965 Voting Rights Act, as is Eastern North Carolina. As long as we have got the Voting Rights Act, and by the way, it's been carried over to the year 2032. Michael, I refer to that as the Lawyers and Demographers Retirement Fund. They're going to always need demographers and lawyers in the whole process. As long as we've got that, there will be racially drawn districts. And when you draw by race in South Carolina, since the majority of our African Americans are Democrats, you're also drawing them politically, because very few of the districts have a minority in them that is Republican. Now, I've seen the parties change from Democrat to Republican back and forth. I work for both of them. I'm going to be sitting up in the balcony when they're drawing them, and I'll laugh and tell them as soon as they screw them up, I'll sit with the court and straighten them back out. That is the closest, I think, to nonpartisan drawing you can get in our state. 3 federal judges. They don't know where the incumbents live. They're going to draw the districts as compact as they must. But they also try to at least draw districts that do not have retrogression in them, so that when it goes to the U.S. Justice Department, their plan will be approved. And I presume most of you know what retrogression is. That means that the plan that is proposed does not do worse for minorities and covered minorities than the plan that they're operating under. So they would have the same chance. It's interesting in that Stephen talked about a plan, a commission. When the Democrats were in control of our House and Senate, every year there was a bill introduced to create a redistricting commission. Now the Republicans are in control. Now the Democrats are putting in a plan that calls for a redistricting commission. They can't decide how they're going to appoint the commission. One of them said, "We'll just make you the commission." I said, "Oh, no, you're not going to get me killed that way in a job." So if you appoint a commission, there are going to be partisan appointments in that commission. Right now we've got a Republican governor, okay, and we've got a Republican House and Senate. We'll have an election before redistricting. Our election is 2010. The number running for office looks like a phone book. We don't know who's going to be there. Every 2 decades before, the governor has vetoed the plan, which means then it goes to federal court. Then the Justice Department gets to look at it also. It's interesting that, and I said this, as long as we've covered under the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, we will never, until we get out from under it, we will never have non-racial plans, non-political plans in South Carolina, because you've got to get past the Justice Department in Washington before you can implement a plan. I don't know if any of you know this or not, but every plan, everything we do in South Carolina, including annexing by a city of a vacant lot or an advisory referendum, must be submitted to the U.S. Justice Department for pre-clearance under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, pre-clearance doesn't mean it's clear, because the last sentence always says that if we find after we've pre-cleared this plan that there's some racial discrimination, we can bring suit against you. So there's always that open door in any pre-cleared plan. We've had pretty good luck so far. We've had one plan turned down, and we had state planes at the time, and I flew 2 state planes with people to Washington, and we got it reversed, had a big party because of it. And we look at now congruent areas as compact as possible, but we hope we can draw this time by VTD, voting tabulation district, where the voting tabulation district is the same as our precincts. Our former governor said he was going to ensure that there would be no split precincts in any election in our state. I went to visit the governor, and I said, "Governor, I hope you plan on funding about 25,000 precincts." He said, "Why?" I said, "We've got 6 congressional districts, 46 Senate districts, 124 House districts. We've got county councils from 12 districts down to 2. We've got city councils from 10 to 4. We've got school districts that split county lines." I said, "There's no way you can keep from splitting precincts when none of them are multiples of each other. We don't have our Senate and House is not nested, where Senate districts are made up of a multiple number of House districts." So he put out a statement. He said, "We're just going to keep cutting like we have been in the past." And so we do cut precincts. Yes, incumbency is an important thing. If you don't think it's personal, years ago, I sat with one of our House members, he's gone now, and explained to him that when we drew the lines before, he needed 19,200 something people. "So what?" he said. I said, "Well, under the new census numbers just came out, you need 25,155. "Well, so give me 25,155. I said, no, but your area has grown. Now you've got 34,000 people. What does that mean? I said, it means you got to give up 9,000 people. He said, and seriously, he looked at me and said, can I give you a list of names and addresses? That's how personal it becomes with the legislature, and even down to the lowest city level and county level. Michael's been involved in that. He knows what I'm talking about. So if you can adhere to the law of one person, one vote, and Voting Rights Act, and compactness and contiguousness, you can get a plan passed. In terms of the whole process, yes, it's personal. They take it very personal. They are aware that it is as important who you draw out of a district as who you draw in it. And they know it. And now we're one of the few states that's got voter registration by race. And so they can pull up voter registration on a file, they can pull up election process on a file, voting returns on a file, and they can literally sit there and look at different algorithms as they put together their district. And the legislature will pass that plan. No, I don't think we'll flip from Republican to Democrat this next time, because we've got too many Democrats who now have flipped Republican because they couldn't get anything done in the House and Senate in the minority party. It becomes very personal with them. They want to continue in office. I get tickled. I've had a number of people invited me to run for Senate and House since I was retired twice and come back. And I said, you know, right now I got 170 of you people who will listen to me. If I run and win, I'll have one person to listen to me, and that's going to be me. And I don't like talking to myself all the time. So it is personal. I don't think you can take politics out of it. I don't think we'll ever have any non-racial, non-political, non-incumbent involved district, not in my lifetime. Thank you.
Well, Bob, I think it's up to you to make the case for a less partisan form of redistricting.
I will do my best. I think I'd prefer to sit here if I may, and I don't know if everybody can hear me. If you can't, let me know. Okay, I see one of my comrades in the back. My name is Bob Phillips, and I work with Common Cause, and you've seen a few of the folks, my colleagues, I guess, in Jeff's film in New York and California. It was good to see those two folks talking about the problems in their states. We're one of the advocates, and one of, I say, my comrades or colleagues is in the back row, Damon Circosta, and a few of us are, I guess, what we call the good government organizations that are coming to the legislature each year and trying to press for reform. And so what I want to do is respond to the three presenters and try to follow Bobby, although I think it's going to be pretty tough. I tell you what, we need you to come up to North Carolina and give the remarks to some of the committee meetings here.
Might get shot.
Well, we'll provide the security for you. I liken some of the redistricting reform efforts. I've been with Common Cause for 9 years, and it's a bit like Groundhog Day, if you remember the movie with Bill Murray, and every day repeats itself. Well, since I have been with Common Cause, every year a bunch of different organizations, right and left, will come together. We have a press conference in the legislative press conference room and call for redistricting reform. We'll have a couple bill sponsors there. Bills will be filed. They'll get sent to committee, and that's it. They never go anywhere. They're never heard. They're never brought up. They're dead. And we have been doing that, at least since I've been with Common Cause, about the last decade, and it, for all I know, has probably been before that as well. It's a very, very difficult issue, as Stephen talks about, to get folks to connect with. I think you say redistricting, and a lot of folks think you're talking about their kids' school reassignment or something like that. They really don't understand this process and some of the impact. And that's what we try to do. But of course, principally, we have to try to connect with the people who decide, at least in North Carolina. And that's my orientation, the North Carolina legislature. As Dr. Crowell mentioned, one of the things we work on, Common Cause, and with some of our other organizations, is the money in politics. And I think they're very intertwined, and I'll make a reference to that. Basically, though, I do agree with Justin, and that is that it's impossible to obviously take politics completely out of redistricting. What we try to do and what we look at, and Stephen made reference to this, are ways to lessen that, and that really probably is more of a focus on the delegation decision In North Carolina, it is the legislature, to the victor go the spoils. The party in power gets to draw the lines, and every year in this election year that we have, you see more money typically being spent to try to win control. One of our organizations here in North Carolina, Democracy North Carolina, that studies this, found that in 2000, the last time that this was which party would be in power was up for grabs, the amount of money spent increased more than 70% from 1998 to 2000. And even though this is a dreadful economy and you would assume that the money that is out there would be less, we fully anticipate we'll see record amounts of money being raised and spent, again, just to try to have control of the legislature and be able to draw the lines. What we are trying to do and what we focus on in the legislature is to, as I said, look at ways of lessening the political influence. You can't take it, as again the speakers have said, the politics out of it. But what California is doing, and as I forget who said it, but 31,000, I've heard 31,000 folks have applied for the opportunity to be on that commission. It gets whittled down in California. I don't know the exact process, but they do whittle it down. They do interviews, and then they literally draw names to, again, try to eliminate as much as possible the influence that someone serving on that commission would have regarding were they selected by, the governor or someone like that. There has been a proposal in North Carolina filed the last two sessions that would be similar to that. Certainly that's something that we would like to see discussed. There's also, as Stephen alluded to, getting citizen participation more into the process. There have been bills filed that would allow any citizen to draw a map submitted. It would be scored in the, based on the criteria that you're trying to achieve, and the map that has the highest score would potentially then be selected and go before the legislature on an up or down vote. Again, those two bills I think have a lot of merit in that they would get more attention to this issue. As Stephen mentions, getting the public more involved. But as I say, there's no incentive for, and this is not unique to North Carolina, but for the party in power to really seriously consider this. We've had many conversations behind closed doors about this with the party in power, and they will say to us, we're not about to do anything that would eliminate our hold onto the legislature, and then they'll kind of throw it back to us and make us feel guilty and say, well, if you want things, the other things we push, like campaign finance reform, if you want those kinds of things, you need to keep us in power. We're the only folks that are going to be listening to you about that. So they sort of play a little bit of a guilt trip back to us. Again, some more anecdotes, though, and these are things that are, I think, very concerning. You have lawmakers who will say, because they do not have competition, they can take it easy. They can, kind of glide through. They don't really have to worry too much about the positions they take during the course of a session. When you don't have competition, again, one of the lawmakers who is from the Triangle tells me that all he has to do is put up some signs on Election Day. That's it. He can expect to have, at least in the last election, his hometown paper, I think, devoted about 2 paragraphs the whole campaign season on his race. That's what you get, unfortunately, when you don't have competition. And there is a lot, I think, connected to redistricting. Again, as I mentioned, money and politics has a lot to do with it as well. But what we've seen in North Carolina, there are 170 members of the North Carolina General Assembly, and we have seen a creeping, I guess it has been more gradual, but where in the early 90s, you had a third of the races that were not competitive, and 3 election cycles ago, it increased to about half, and that's where it's been. And you've got ways of defining competition, whether there's actually 2 people that are in the race and whether there's real competition. Sometimes some of these districts certainly are drawn and they're composed by population demographics where you'll never really have, in terms of politics, true competition, but you may have members of both parties file, and so whether that's real competition or not is debatable. What we see in North Carolina, and again, I'm sure this is the way it is in other states, is that you might have a dozen districts that really are somewhat competitive, or the party leaders believe that that they are, and that's where the money goes. There is a district in western North Carolina, very rural in nature, one of the largest geographic districts in the state, and you've had the winning candidate spend, at least in a recent election, more than $750,000 to win a part-time legislative seat that pays less than $14,000 a year. And that, of course, skews what the average cost of a campaign is across the state in the General Assembly, but it stands out. You don't see that very often. But in these competitive districts, that's where the big money is spent. And the money, of course, is not raised in those districts. They're raised by the party leaders and by the parties themselves, and then they're dispersed out of there. And regardless of how the district is drawn, what it comes down to, and in North Carolina, you're going to have many communities in many areas politically that are going to be very much in alignment, where you'll never have a politically competitive district. Chapel Hill, Orange County it's hard to imagine a Republican in a legislative district winning. You can say in Moore County or in some of the mountain counties, it's very hard to imagine that a Democratic candidate could win. But again, getting back to what we focus on as advocates of good government and trying to provide more sunshine to the process. Redistricting, unfortunately, is a very dirty, grimy, and closed process. Literally what happens is, with particularly the computers, the parties will have a computer set up in a room at the state party headquarters, blocks away from our legislative building. They'll take the lawmaker who has to have his district changed a little bit. You'll have your technician there, and they'll just play with the lines. And that's done, and it's nothing illegal about it, but it's done obviously away from the public, away from folks like us, away from the media. The plan's cobbled together. They'll have their committee meetings, and under the guise that it's a little bit more open, but it really is not. And that's just how this process will continue to work until some kind of reform can get passed. As much as I'd like to say that in North Carolina there is hope that we will get reform, I don't see it happening anytime in the future. I'm extremely intrigued by the film that Jeff has shown us, and I'd love it if I could have somehow every elected leader watch that with their constituents. Maybe that could make a difference. As I've said in the early remarks, it's very, very difficult for us to get anyone to pay attention to this issue. And you watch a film like that, or you see some of the news coverage, and it was interesting for me to see John F. Kennedy making mention of that, particularly calling into the legislative drawing of the lines, and how many years you've had folks talk about this, but it unfortunately never really changes the system. We will see, I guess, in this election year, an enormous amount of money spent in North Carolina and elsewhere across the country to see who can maintain control. We'll be back. We'll try to talk about the need for redistricting reform. The party in power, however, will slam the door in place, and things, unfortunately, and I know I sound very cynical, but things, unfortunately, will stay the same. So, trying to get back to answering the original question, I do feel it's very difficult, and probably it is impossible to completely have a apolitical redistricting process. But there is something wrong, and when you can get people's attention, and it is the old cliche of having elected leaders not select their voters, but the voters select them, people do understand that, and that's what those of us in the reform advocacy community will continue to talk about, and we'll just keep plugging away.
Thank you. I have a list of just piercing, insightful questions I'm dying to ask, but unfortunately, this is not about me. Before we go to the audience, is there anything that any of you is dying to say or to ask each other?
I had just one reaction, which was to say that Bobby's stories struck me as just additional evidence on the side of the question about whether some kind of reform is in order. The fact that a small town of 400 people, you say you had to split into 4 districts, that's just nuts.
But the Voting Rights Act required it.
Into 4?
Well, that's all we could do.
Well,
100 people per district. And we used census data. They had to have an election by districts, not by large.
And in addition to that, the more important thing to me was your discussion of how personal it is.
Oh, yeah.
It shouldn't be that the legislators are asking for people by name to be left out of their districts, right? I mean,
Heather.
I just have a question for Justin. And so I love all but the first 3 minutes of your presentation. So I completely agree that the witless invocation of competition as the be-all, end-all for districting is a problem. I completely agree that you need to take into account the representation point and that there's a lot of ways in which the debate misses that because it overclaims on representation. I agree you can't take everyone agrees you can't take politics out of redistricting entirely. I mean, so in every piece of it. So what I find sort of mystifying about your presentation was the frame you used. I think of it sort of like the opposite of Jerry Maguire. You lost us at hello. In the following sense, that is, if you use the word not partisan to be definitional, that when there are winners and losers, then you have basically written off a whole bunch of discussions that people might be interested in having. So, for example, if you say anytime there are winners and losers chosen, it's political. Well, that cuts off, for example, us discussing, well, why is it that in Europe they have a different system than we do? Is it possible there's actually a spectrum here between more or less political? None of it is to say that in Europe they aren't choosing winners and losers. Anyone who's been in this business for a minute knows you're choosing winners and losers. So the question, I think, is how you choose winners and losers. And again, that doesn't go to the sort of mediating theories you use, but just who's choosing them. And so if there's, and this is, I think, I take it what Bob's point and Steve's point was, is that there's a set of questions around that you just cut off if you phrase it as anytime there are winners and losers, it's political. Yes, of course. But the question is, can we talk about other systems? And you also cut off the thing that I think you must be interested in. Because if you're a politics addict, I'm a politics addict, we're all politics addicts, we love this stuff. But you miss the possibility that politics are about people, not elite self-interest. These things are always interconnected. You have to think about how they relate to one another. But again, there's got to be more to be said simply than this is about winners and losers. So everything was, I just don't understand why you use that as your frame.
Perhaps you would like to respond to that.
Sure. I use that as my frame partially because the word political is used as an epithet, and I don't like having it used as an epithet. Usually when people talk about apolitical redistricting, usually what's sort of buried sometimes a little bit underneath the surface, sometimes a little bit more underneath the surface, sometimes right out in the open, is when people say they want an apolitical redistricting process, usually what they really want is more competitive districts. There's variation in that. There are other things that you might want out of the process. There are people who are really more concerned with delegation than with algorithms. But usually, when people say they want something apolitical in terms of the redistricting process, they want competitive districts. As far as who we should be concerned with, elites versus people, I am more concerned with people. That's sort of the point. The reason I personally prefer a district where you have 75% of the voters of one party and 25% of the other is because 25% of the people in that district will lose. I'd rather have 25% lose than 49%. As far as the overall framing and the question of alternative systems, sure, there are very interesting questions about what electoral system you use. Most of Europe uses proportional representation, and proportional representation, unless you have a mixed PR single-member district system, which some places do, if it's pure PR, you don't have redistricting at all, which means there is a process which does not exist in those countries. There are some benefits to that. There are some drawbacks to that. And yeah, that's an interesting question too. That's just not what I took the question of the panel to mean. And we can have a discussion about whether single-member district systems are better or worse than PR. There are very interesting debates about that. That is also a political discussion, and the determination of whether we have PR versus single-member district will determine sets of winners and losers. And I'm going to come back to the same basic point that any type of system you choose will determine who wins and who loses.
Can I just follow this? There are two
Sure.
questions, right?
Can
We're
we?
talking about winners and losers and who gets represented ultimately, what happens when you choose how the districts are drawn. But then there's the first question, which is who makes the choice about it?
Yeah, that's the delegation decision. Well,
that's the place where people talk about nonpartisanship in a different way than you're describing. And that's the piece where both people can be let in, the way that Steve was talking about, and in which you can imagine something other than self-interested legislators doing it, which is what we see in other countries.
Well, yes, but my point is when people say they want a different type of delegation, usually that's because they don't like who has the authority right now because they don't like how they're doing it. So usually when we have that type of discussion, what people will say is because we have partisan elected officials redrawing lines, they're going to do partisan and bipartisan gerrymanders. We don't like that. We want competitive districts. So let's give authority to somebody who's going to do that. The question of delegation and algorithm are, in my mind, inseparable.
Okay. In the midst of his first answer, a number of hands popped up. The one who seemed to be first and most persistent is this gentleman here.
Yeah, I guess I'm a lot nicer than Heather on this. I just think you've confused a number of different categories. So you've defined political losers to mean everything, but which doesn't include the process by which we're concerned about different ways in which people win or lose. Right? So for example, if I'm applying to a particular school and someone says, well, there are winners and losers, and because there are winners and losers, it's illegitimate, I say, well, that's silly. There are different ways of picking people to come to the school that are legitimate, and there are ways of picking them that are illegitimate, right? So the fact that there are people that are going to get in, there are people that are not going to get in, that doesn't tell us anything. What we're really concerned about is the mechanism by which we're choosing people and leaving some in and putting some out. So to confuse both of those categories doesn't make any sense to me. Right, so this is the way, the reaction that I think Heather is having, and which is why my hand was persistent. Right, so you could say, you could say, well, yes, you could draw district lines in ways in which some people are going to, 45% of the voters are going to be perpetual losers. Well, that's a function of the distribution, and we might say, well, that's fine. But if it's a function of the way, as you said earlier in your presentation, right, which you in fact pointed out, though for only a sentence or two, if it's a function of an ex-ante determination that we know how everything's going to play out, we might say, well, that's not a game that we should be playing in. So there's a way of applying to schools. If I know that only the rich, the kids of the applicants of rich kids are the ones that are predetermined to get in, well, yeah, that's a selection criteria. Right? But that's very different from saying, okay, you have to pass some tests in order to do it. We could argue about each of those things, but let's argue about each of those things. And that's what's puzzling, right, to sort of be a lot less nicer than my very, very nice colleague is being. That's what's puzzling and maddening, quite frankly, about the way that you've put it.
They seem to have you on the spot again. You want to respond again?
I'm used to this. Anyway,
I agree with him, by the way, so I'm on his good side.
I have one person. All right. So a couple of points then. One, I think it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask whether you would prefer to have more people not get their way, but not have who gets their way be determined a priori by the redistricting system. What's more important to you, having the winners and losers chosen in advance of the election or having fewer losers? As far as the analogy to school admissions are fundamentally different from elections in that you might not get into one school and get into another, and you're fine. But every election, every district has precisely one representative in any given body, unless you have multi-member districts, which you can design those if you want. That'll give you different election results, and you'll get a different set of people who get their way and people who don't get their way. However, any election is going to have one winner in this country. We have a winner-take-all system. The people whose candidate does not win do not get the representative of their choice.
What follows?
Yeah, I think the American people are actually pretty comfortable with that idea because that's why we have elections in a sense. And so the question, which I think is some of what we're getting at here is, well, what would then we propose to do it better? How do we get to the point where we can argue about doing it better? I think that's more important than just saying, that any redistricting plan is automatically going to create a set of winners and losers?
Well, what I suggest in the paper is that we can have a debate over the type of redistricting system, but let's keep in mind that every system will create winners and losers. And as far
I don't know. I'm not trying to add to the pile on, but I'm just.
But as far as improving the system, though, I'll mention one important statistic. And that is what people think of their members of Congress. So we have a redistricting system that draws district lines in an interesting way, and well, let's find out exactly how satisfied people are with the representation they get. On average, about 85% of the public is perfectly happy with their members of Congress. They hate Congress as a whole, but Congress as a whole doesn't work for them. Only one member of the House of Representatives works for them, and 85% of the people like the people working for them in Congress. So solve a problem. What problem? I don't see a problem.
Okay, to have some geographical distribution here and not have all the questions come from one section.
But what's wrong with doing that? Why don't you just pick whatever you want?
There are winners and losers in this even.
We want to be winners. That's all.
Let's go to the back, and then Bill, you'll be next after him.
I like the analysis. The analysis is very elegant. It's wonderful, good stuff. I'm not sure I disagree with it in some ways, but the problem with it is it's static. It's one election. So those 49 people who are losers this time, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, or whatever, have a reasonable chance of being winners again. Okay? So that's the problem with the analysis. It's static.
There are a couple of problems with that argument. One is, even if you take that into consideration, members of Congress, even from marginal districts, tend to get reelected the vast majority of the time. So even if you're in a district where it's 51-49, if you're on the 49 side in that first election, you're probably going to lose for a lot of elections following that. So you might win at some point in the future, but it's not going to be anywhere near 50% of the time. And again, the question is, which do you prefer? Do you prefer to have people who are perpetually unable to elect the people they want, but not very many of them, or have a lot of people not get the people they want, but not have that determined in advance by the redistricting system? That's a question. It's a very legitimate question. I'm open to that question. What I'm not open to is the idea that there is such a thing as a redistricting system where there are no losers.
Okay, here's where we're going. Bobby's dying to say something. He's going to be brief. And then Bill.
Very brief.
Bill, if you will promise that you will ask something that someone other than Justin can respond to, we'll call on you. Okay, okay. Bobby.
I have an election coming up April 14th. I'm up for re-election. I'm running unopposed. That's the way I like to run. And that's not by any accident. That's by design. I designed it that way. I'm running for a university board seat. Our General Assembly elects us. And since I work for the General Assembly, nobody's going to run against me because they know I'm going to get elected by all the votes. Now, I ran for office at a school board, the fastest growing school district in the state years ago, in a nonpartisan election. Before that election was over, even though it was nonpartisan, it became very politically oriented between Democratic and Republican on both sides of the fence. So even if you have a nonpartisan election, both parties get avidly involved. Only way I could survive it was I had friends in both parties. Now we want to know who you are. Go.
Okay, now with your promise that you're going to...
I promise, even though he tried to knock off his card and avoid being asked questions, I have a question for Stephen. So as one of those foolish people who volunteered to be on the California Redistricting Commission, I want to give a little bit more information about it to everybody and then ask the question. So 31,000 people applied, 25,000 of those were found to be eligible, and now we're all being asked to submit supplemental applications, essays, letters of recommendation, statements about conflict of interest. They're then going to interview the 120 most qualified.
Can I interrupt? Who decides who's on the commission?
Well,
to whom are you making this application?
It's the State Auditor General.
The Application Review Board, review panel.
Who's on the Application Review Board?
The 60 names are then going to be sent to the legislature, where the leaders are going to have a chance to cross people's names out. There will then be 36 people left. 8 people will be chosen randomly, and then the 8 people have to choose the other 6 members, giving us 14. So it's really complicated and allegedly nonpartisan, and I think it's fulfilling one of the things you talked about, which is
publicizing it because I've been talking to a lot of people about, oh, what should I say in my application? Should I really do this? But I don't see a lot of accountability in the system. Once we're chosen, once the 14 people are chosen, they're not accountable. They're going to draw the lines. So is that enough that it's citizen driven, or is accountability really important? Because you said there were two important components, and as far as I can tell, the California plan only fulfills one.
Well, the other piece of it that provides one additional type of accountability that I didn't talk about at all is that the plan is then subject to a referendum, which has not historically been true of California's maps. So, you know, that's Michael Kang has argued for that as that alone is a way to promote some accountability in our districting process. Now, I'm not quite sure that I think that adds much, but it's, you know, being argued for as a way to give the voters, the citizens at large, the final say about the outcome. And in fact, Dan Lowenstein has now filed a petition to begin gathering signatures to try to repeal all of Prop 11, except to leave in place the referendum option, which wasn't there before, and to argue that's all we need is a chance for the voters to hold still the politicians who would go back to drawing the maps accountable. So there is that piece of it. But the more important part of your question is to what extent a broader participatory approach to the creation of the maps itself without more is a kind of accountability. And I'm arguing that it is a kind of accountability, not in the way that you're asking for, you know, not because we can after the fact come back, but because we're creating a process, and the particular design of that process still leaves lots of questions. And your description of all these steps involved in the constitution of the 14 members of the Citizens Redistricting Commission is just one example of that type of thing. But it's designed to give us a group of people that we're then going to trust. And, you know, it's just for 10 years, I guess, right? We can always, that's one of the things about a lot of these issues in election laws. They're not permanent decisions. I mean, they're not static in a sense. But the final piece of it all is that we're not, the California Redistricting Commission is not being given unfettered discretion to do whatever they want, right? It's part of a combined package that also includes a specification of the algorithm, or, you know, a number of criteria that have to be adhered with. And in the California case, it's that they can't take into account party of the voters. So.
Okay, you've been very patient, but I have Bill back there. Bill's one of the gerrymandering specialists for the North Carolina legislature, and he's been patient for a few minutes, so.
I actually have a new question here, different than the one I was thinking of before. I'm interested in the redistricting commissions, the independent redistricting commissions that aren't like California, aren't like, I believe Arizona is required to have competitiveness as a criteria. There are a number of them that just have, I think Ohio is one you described, where there's a certain number of elected officials who aren't legislators who decide things. Arkansas has the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the Governor on their independent redistricting commission. And it truly is not a matter of legislators drawing their own districts. But in 1991, one of the people doing the drawing was Bill Clinton. So how non-political can that be? My question is, with a lot of these commissions, if you all are aware of them, is there a prohibition on the members of the commission, the non-legislator members of the commission, making deals with, bargaining with legislators about district in which the deal involves districts and support for non-redistricting legislative matters? so that the governor can't say, well, I'll draw you the district you like as long as you support my budget, as long as you support the sales tax that I want.
Or say universal health care or something.
Yeah, or support for the university or something like that. Is that, I mean, that seems like it would introduce another element of politics into redistricting, and I'm wondering if any of these independent redistricting commissions prohibit that kind of thing.
The question itself does, I think, indicate sort of an additional way in which an unseemly type of politics can and does in many places creep in. You know, I don't know that I've seen anything that has targeted that problem in specific terms, the way you just were articulating. Instead, what we see are proposals that require openness and transparency that has not always been present. You know, that tries to make sure that there isn't a way for this to happen just in the warehouse 2 blocks down from the legislature, but instead it's being done with everybody aware of these decisions, and efforts to provide some sort of remove from those types of political pressures by preventing people from serving on those boards who themselves are or recently were or in the future would like to be themselves elected. Right? Now, that's not a perfect response to the particular problem you described, but I don't know of a reform effort that is going after that in that specific way. I don't know if Mark does.
Yeah, well, you mentioned before the Reform Ohio Now attempt in 2005 had a very convoluted, complicated process of selecting people for this board that would do the redistricting, in which, as you point out, they couldn't be elected officials. They couldn't have been elected officials in the last, 5 years. They couldn't run for another 5 years. Their wives or relatives couldn't have been elected officials. And it was very elaborate, but was, as you pointed out, turned out.
Well, and it doesn't prevent the people who are outside of that category from still conducting the kind of deal making. But in theory, the incentives for that kind of deal making would be dramatically reduced by keeping off those boards that group of partisans.
Okay, you have been admirably patient. Do you still want to speak?
If I'm still out, yeah.
Thank you for bearing with us.
So this is sort of a follow-up, I guess, to the earliest questions, which were kind of pushing Justin on process, but I'll make, it's a question for the whole panel, but I also have a specific question for Justin. So I guess the question is this. So it seems like there's two sets of values people have been talking about on the panel. One is a set of process values that might be associated with changing the structure of redistricting, right? So transparency, openness, an increase in public confidence, other kinds of things that could affect political behavior and how people feel about politics. And then Justin's more focused on outcomes, right? He's more, and he, I think, rightly says, well, look, the process is obviously related to the outcomes. And so I guess I wanted to ask sort of one question about that connection for the state level reforms, and then a question for Justin, maybe about the substance, or maybe for everybody. So the process to substance connection question is, how do we make sense of the state level reforms, particularly in areas where they're likely to also affect congressional redistricting, given the current competitive environment in Congress? So I guess the shortest way to raise the question is, should we all be really worried about the California Redistricting Commission if what it's going to do is disarm the largest state that's likely to, bias its legislative assembly districts in congressional districts in a potentially democratic matter, say if the Democrats control California after the next election, without some other state like say Texas disarming itself? So that's the question, whether we should, the state level reformers, kind of worry about that. On substance, so what are the goals? So it seems like there's some limited agreement, like everybody agrees we don't want, we don't want legislators to name by name people to remove from the districts, but I feel like we need, if we're going to have some other system, we need some broader understanding of what kind of goals we want. I think I got to agree with Justin. I think there's this common view about polarization and districting, and there's just I think there's basically very little evidence to support it. So if we really care about polarization, it's not clear we should be fighting about districting. We should probably be fighting about something else. Okay, but so then what is, I guess my question for everyone is, so what should we be caring about here? So what is the big substantive representational goal? And for Justin, I guess I want to say, I don't think your goal can be the goal, and here's why. I think that this idea...
Can I do this? They're going to turn off the lights in a minute. Can I get the panel to respond to your question and let that be the closing opportunity for everybody? I'm very sorry. It's just a matter of time.
The lights are turned off. Usually, you can see by the effigies of me being burned.
Yeah. but you asked a great question for the panel as a whole. Who would like to respond to that? And Justin, you're free to respond to anything, of course.
So basically, you're asking what are the goals of represent? I mean, I think at least for my part in making this film was the idea that if you educate people in the basics of how redistricting work, whatever you believe the proper way to do redistricting is, that person is automatically going to understand more about how government works than they did before, because redistricting is so fundamental to how we organize the whole thing. Now, in terms of where we should take redistricting, I mean, I guess I feel that we need to make sure people understand that there's a bit of a split between, in a democracy, we're not guaranteeing that they're going to get the representation that they want, but we're going to guarantee that they're going to get the possibility of participating in the way we select representatives. And I think that's something a little bit slightly different than what you've been talking about. And I think, people are comfortable with the idea of having winners and losers. That's why it's not a great place to end. We just need to figure out, how we arrive at a process which everybody feels comfortable with. I mean, a quick example, part of the film that we didn't show today is a town in Anamosa, Iowa, with about 5,500 people. One of the districts had a prison in it, and so the last time they had an election, a guy won a city council seat by 2 write-in votes, because there was nobody else in the district who was going to run. That town got together, deliberated, and decided to change their method of electing representatives, got rid of the districting system, and decided to go to at-large. And I think that's a great thing. And I think if you educate people about what redistricting means, you could have communities deciding for themselves what they think is the proper method of election.
The interesting additional wrinkle in your question, though, Adam, is what citizens should be thinking about that issue in the context in which it's much harder for there to be a collective national consensus on it. And should California do something like its Citizens Redistricting Commission for the congressional races too, if it's not sort of a unilateral disarmament going on around the country or not? I mean, it reminds me of discussions from more than a decade ago about term limits, back when there was a possibility of term limits on members of Congress. Should a state impose something like that on its own members of Congress, absent all states doing it? So that requires a sort of meta-level discussion of the kind that we've been talking about, and that's.
And there is an effort to add congressional districts to Prop 11.
Yeah, and at the moment it's not, right? California is just the state legislature.
Justin, I feel like there's some moral obligation to let you have the last word if you want it.
So many to choose from. As far as my goals, I think I've been pretty upfront about what my goals are. My goal is I want as many people as possible to be happy with their specific representatives. Whatever redistricting system will get you to that, that's what I want.
Adam, please accept my apology for not getting to finish your discussion. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time, which means that I don't get to ask my very insightful questions and make my comments. I do appreciate the information the panel's brought to us, and you obviously have provoked interest and discussion among the folks. So everybody give a round of applause to the panel. Now, beyond this, I don't know anything about the schedule. I assume Toby, look, here's a smart person who's going
All right, so we're scheduled to start lunch at 11:45. That's in the Birdman Lounge, which is sort of down that hall and off to